Good afternoon and welcome to the Adrienne Arsh Latin America Center's International Women's Day event. We are honored to have a roster of global experts with us today for special conversations about the role and future of women around the world. I am Capricia Penevic-Marshall, Ambassador in Residence at the Atlantic Council and Vice Chair of the Adrienne Arsh Latin America Center's Advisory Council. As you saw on the slides at the top of our program, the Atlantic Council is an organization of many women, of many backgrounds from all over the world. Our president, Fred Kemp, launched the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council led by Paige Ennis and Clitandra Thompson to affirm our mission through recruitment, content, convenings, talent management, and board members and partners. We are proud to be such a global and diverse organization and to be home to the next generation of women leaders. The Adrienne Arsh Latin America Center is proud to host today's virtual discussion on women's rights and gender equality and inclusion, particularly in the Americas. As we launch our campaign, #Mujeres at the Table, Women at the Table. This new initiative strengthens our focus on women's leadership and promotes a constructive dialogue on solutions to the many challenges women still face. 2020 was a hard year for everyone. Women were both uniquely impacted and served fiercely on the front lines of the COVID-19 response. As Latin America, the Caribbean, and the world continue to face challenging years ahead, these times also represent a tremendous opportunity to make gender equality front and center of the solution to recovery post-COVID-19. We open our discussion with two women who have lifted the voices and bettered conditions for women from every corner of the globe. It is a personal joy for me to have my mentors, Ambassador Melanne Verveer and Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, whose shoulders millions of women around the world have stood upon in order to break those many glass ceilings above. We are also so fortunate to have a panel of women on the front lines of government in the region, making an enormous difference. Vice President Marta Lucia Ramirez of Colombia, Minister of Education of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. the Honorable Neon Gadsby-Dolly, and Minister Mayu Avila, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador. To introduce our first panel, we have our founder, Adrienne Arsh, a woman of so many firsts. Her consistent devotion and innovative vision, coupled with her nature to challenge the norm, is a force like none other, a force that moves critical conversations and transforms preconceived notions of Latin America and its place in the world. Adrienne?
Thank you, Capricia. And for today's event, it not only will provide us the opportunity to recognize the achievements of these commendable female leaders and the vital role women play in bridging divides, it also provides us with the opportunity to discuss the barriers women still face in leadership. With that, I will be very brief, but I want to welcome and introduce Secretary Hillary Clinton and Ambassador Melanne Verveer. Ambassador Verveer was the first U.S. ambassador at large for global women's issues at the State Department. And she currently serves as executive director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And she is also a board member of the Atlantic Council. As we celebrate firsts, Secretary Clinton was the first female presidential candidate of a major political party in the United States. Prior to being a presidential candidate, Secretary Clinton was First Lady of the United States, U.S. Senator from New York, and one in 3 women secretaries of state. I think with both of these women, you either give a 2-sentence introduction or you give an hour for each. So that is what I've done. And now it's a pleasure to turn this over to Melanne to take this chat forward.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, and thank you especially for all that you do. We are all very grateful to you. You know, it's always a special pleasure to be with Secretary Clinton And on International Women's Day, we can just say how much more a pleasure it is to celebrate this day with you. I'd like to start, Madam Secretary, with the state of the world's women. Not too many months ago, we marked the 25th anniversary of the fourth UN World Conference on Women. You have been very engaged in all of that because it was there that you proclaimed for all the world to hear, human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And to this day, that clarion call is still echoing around the world. I know that in these recent months, you've been very engaged in assessing what's happened since Beijing. Where are the gaps? What progress have we made? And perhaps most especially, how do we accelerate so we're not waiting another 100 years to have true gender equality around the world? So let's start there. I know that you have a great deal of wisdom on this topic.
Oh, Milan, thank you so much. And before I start, let me thank the Atlantic Council and in particular, Adrian and the Adrian Arsh Latin American Center that is housed at the Atlantic Council, which is such a visionary organization, and also to Ambassador Capricia Marshall and everyone associated with today's event. You know, I think that it's fair to say that in the 25 years since that speech in Beijing, there has been progress, at least up until COVID. There was progress in girls going to school, obviously primary, but also secondary, university schooling. There was progress in healthcare, so that more and more girls and women were given the full range of healthcare. We dropped the maternal mortality rate significantly. We saw progress in changing laws and constitutions so that they were more inclusive when it came to women and girls. So we were on a track of change, too slow, but nevertheless, it was occurring. I think it's fair to say, though, that even before COVID hit us so hard, we didn't see the same progress in positions within the private sector, especially at the highest levels for women. We didn't see women holding a sufficient number, nowhere near equal in public positions, both elected and appointed by governments across the world. We didn't see women at a lot of the tables where decisions were made, particularly when it came to peace and security. So there was work to be done, but now I think it's fair to say, Milan, that COVID has set us back. We're beginning to acquire quite a bit of evidence about how hard hit women and girls have been disproportionately, both because of the pandemic and the economic consequences of it. So we have a higher unemployment rate among women, not just in the developed world in the United States, but throughout the world. We have a disproportionate number of women having to leave the workforce to care for children because schools closed, daycare closed, other family members were unavailable because we were unable to come together. We've seen an increase in domestic violence against women and girls, an increase in child marriage of young girls. So we, unfortunately, will have a lot of work to do to come out of this pandemic, to deal with the disproportionate social and economic impacts on women and girls if we are to get back on the track toward gender equality, which should be the goal again and always on this International Women's Day.
You know, you're so right to talk about COVID because of these disproportionate impacts on women and the inequalities it's exposed. And I know that the UN Women estimates that the pandemic will leave 118 million women and girls in poverty in the Americas and the Caribbean. So there is an awful lot of work to do. And I wonder if you have any guidance on how we can build back better, how we can build back equally. because already we're seeing women's organizations shunted to the side of decision making.
Well, I think there's work for all of us to do. Let me focus on both the public and the private sector. I would very much hope that businesses would do everything they possibly can to bring women back into the workforce so that women who were supporting their families, sometime as the single income of support, will have a chance to get back in, even if their income is not as high as it was before COVID. At least get them back into the workforce and try to move as quickly as possible to increase their incomes once economic activity starts up again. Obviously, that's easier for big employers than small employers, but I really hope every employer thinks hard about bringing women back into the workforce. And here, governments can help. I'm very proud that the United States Congress has passed the American Rescue Plan, which has money for stimulus for families and businesses. It has subsidies for health care. It has direct payments for children so that 93% of children in families in America will be receiving direct payments. So I think that our president, our new president and vice president, and our Congress have really understood you've got to go much further to recover from this pandemic. And there is so much that both business and government can and should be doing. And let me just end by saying that this is in everybody's interest. We've got to get economic activity going again. The 118 million women and girls who will fall into poverty in just Latin America and the Caribbean means that economic activity slows down. It means that tax receipts slow down. It means that there are all kinds of consequences, like children not getting back into school. So every government, as you look at coming out of this pandemic, really should be asking, what can we do to get everybody back into the workforce as quickly as possible, with particular attention paid to women because they bore the brunt of the economic consequences of the pandemic.
Such a timely topic and such good advice. Not too long ago, you wrote a very profound article in The Atlantic in which you said, it's no longer enough to talk about women's rights. We must augment women's power in every sphere, including government. What did you mean by that?
Well, I have been involved in the women's movement here at home in the United States and around the world for many years. And we've made progress in enshrining rights for women in laws, in constitutions. But to be totally honest, we haven't made as much progress as we should have. And so what I mean is that as we think about the rights that women should have to be full participants in their societies and the economies and the cultures of their communities and countries, we're going to have to make sure women have the power to deliver on that promise of rights. And I think that means women should be included at every table where decisions are made for the economy, for governments, for communities, any kind of decision. And I know that Latin America is certainly ahead in trying to have used quotas in many, many places throughout Latin America and the Caribbean in order to give women a foot on the ladder. But I think we're going to have to be even more intentional. How can we make sure that women are at the table politically, economically, to recover from COVID? You know, if women were not involved in the decision making in our new administration as they are, it might have gone overlooked that we needed to put money into helping schools reopen, putting money into hoping that daycare centers can reopen so women have a choice to go back to work. So women need to be there with our perspectives, our experiences, so that we can make better decisions that will try to remedy the inequality of power that still exists everywhere.
And clearly, one of those spheres of power is in government, is in elective office. And yet, we know, and you know so well, that there are barriers that stand in the way of women who want to run for elective office. How can, besides quotas, what other opportunities and ways are there to overcome those barriers so that we can have the kind of record that Latin America now has, being the region with the highest number of women in the legislature, in parliament, of all of the regions of the world?
Well, and also I know in the Caribbean right now, I think the highest region in the world in heads of government and heads of state. And certainly in the last 20 years, Latin America has led the world in women elected president and serving at the highest levels of government. So I think Latin America has a lot to teach us, but I believe that there are many circumstances that make it difficult for women. There still is a double standard. We should be very clear about that. So anytime a political party can recruit and support more women to run for elective office, that's a good step forward. Non-governmental organizations like the ones I support through my group Onward Together, which helps to recruit and train women in running for office, give them the kind of tools that they need to be able to get into the political arena. Women need to understand social media, which plays such a huge role now in spreading a lot of false information as well as accurate information, and how best to utilize that positively. But I think governments and political parties are particularly important in making sure we have a pipeline filled with women who want to compete for both elected and appointed offices in governments, because unless we're very intentional about it, it just won't happen. We have to be standing behind the women who decide to enter the political world, because it's hard, it's challenging, it's sometimes quite brutal, as we know. So women have to be well prepared and supported to do that.
So, Secretary Clinton, you're a role model to so many women, not just in the United States, not just in the region, but around the world. And I wonder what words of encouragement you might have, particularly to those women listening right now, thinking maybe I should run for office. Is there something you can say to them?
Well, it is such a deeply personal decision. I would encourage any woman who's even thinking about it to do her homework. Find out how your particular country or community chooses candidates for office. Figure out where you stand politically so you know what party that you want to be part of, to ally with. Really look into the issues that you want to champion, and your efforts to try to position yourself as someone who can get things done on behalf of your constituents. I think it's also important to make sure that you volunteer or work for somebody in politics so you really know that's what you want to try to do, because it's a huge personal undertaking, and if you have a family, it will affect your family as well. But it's an incredible experience, and it's a great honor to be a democratically elected office holder in one of our countries in the region, where we can help to improve people's lives, where we can be a voice for the voiceless. So if you do your homework, you try to figure out where you stand and what you're comfortable being for and talking about, and you still want to do it, then I encourage the women who are so interested, who are watching, to go ahead and give it a try. You never know how far you can go. And a lot of the women who have been successful in Latin America and the Caribbean had other professions. They were, business people. They were teachers. They were in the media. They were other academic types. They had lots of different experiences which they brought with them. So read up on some of the women and find women that you admire that you would like to follow in the footsteps of.
There's a lot of conversation today and some action on something called the feminist foreign policy. And Mexico was the first country in Latin America to announce that they want to adopt a feminist foreign policy. In many ways, you were the precursor of all of that, because particularly as Secretary of State, but also in your early steps when you had returned from Beijing, you were working to integrate a gender perspective into these decisions. But particularly as secretary, you talked about how important this is to national security, and how important it is that it be mainstream throughout everything our foreign policy apparatus is working on. Why is it important? Because I think this is a concept that still eludes so many who don't understand, as many of those presidents and prime ministers you've talked to over the years who have, as you've said, glaze over when you raise this issue, and yet is absolutely critical to outcomes.
Well, you're right, Milan. When we started, you and I working together back in the 90s to try to elevate women's issues to an integrated part of our foreign policy, it was met with a lot of, curious stares and questions. And then certainly when I was Secretary of State and you were the first ever global ambassador for women's issues, we had our work cut out for us, and not just around the world, at home in Washington, to persuade our fellow diplomats that they needed to include women's issues in every discussion about diplomacy, about war and peace and security, about democracy, about human rights. And we made progress. I was very pleased to see that. But it still is a bit of a struggle to persuade people that the evidence shows conclusively if women are participating in their economies, a country's economy grows, the gross domestic product grows. If women are involved in the diplomacy and the foreign policy of their country, particularly when it comes to issues of war and peace, any peace treaty is more likely to be successful because women have to be brought into it, not left on the sidelines. And as we face a myriad of international challenges, women have to play a very integrated, essential role in addressing all of them, whether it be how to avoid the next pandemic, or climate change, or trafficking, or refugee flow. And, there's just so much that still needs to be done. And I would hope that every country integrates the rights and participation and the needs of women into their policymaking.
Secretary Clinton, that proverbial time is running away from us. And I just want to ask one more final question about the existential threat of our time, climate change. We are already seeing an outsized impact in Latin America, rising temperatures, droughts, water shortages, melting glaciers, fires in the Amazon, and so many people increasingly unable to eke out their livelihoods as farmers anymore because of the drought conditions. And of course, that's leading to displacement and potentially worse. And we know that women are among the most vulnerable, but we rarely talk about women as problem solvers when it comes to climate. And maybe because this is the issue of our time in many, many ways for our planet and our people, you can give us some parting words about what we can all be doing.
Well, that would take a whole other session, but I appreciate you raising it because, women in Latin America have been real leaders, both in their own countries and globally, Currently, the woman leading the UN efforts on climate change is Patricia Espinosa from Mexico. And obviously, we know she was preceded by leadership by a woman from Costa Rica. So there is a lot of knowledge and experience among women in Latin America and the Caribbean, firsthand knowledge as well as research knowledge. And I would personally love to see an international effort across national borders to bring women in Latin America and the Caribbean together around climate change, to have an agenda that would be then taken to every single government as well as international organizations. Because the fact is that, again, women are often the first victims of climate change. You know, smallholder farmers across the world, including in Latin America, are still at least half, if not predominantly, women. Women are often on the front lines of seeing the effects of climate change and the problems that it brings for their children and their families. So I think there could be, given the great resource of women in Latin America and the Caribbean who understand this issue, as you say, Milan, are seeing it firsthand, to have great leadership coming from women. And you know, the climate conference in Rio leading up to the Paris Agreement, you know, there's so much that we know now. And many governments are receptive, but let's be honest, some governments are going the wrong direction. They are, you know, leading us into a terrible exacerbation of climate change with their policies about agriculture and clear cutting and other things that are terribly dangerous to everyone, but particularly to the people nearest by. So let me just close by urging the great leaders you're going to hear from in a minute to be on the front lines of creating a cross-national climate agenda for Latin America and the Caribbean. And let me also commend Colombia for granting temporary protective status to Venezuelans who are refugees in Colombia. We're going to see many, many more refugees, not just because of failing governments, but because of climate change. We're going to have to come to grips with what we do with the millions of people who are going to be fleeing drought and extreme climate and other problems that climate change is creating. So all of us need to be humble enough to ask, what can we do and how can we work together? I'm looking forward to the Glasgow conference next summer, and I'm so grateful that under President Biden, the United States rejoined the Paris Accord. We have to get serious about it and try to, you know, be as focused as possible to create different kinds of jobs, different kinds of economic activity in order to keep people employed while we change our whole attitude toward fossil fuels, toward carbon dioxide, and toward some of the practices, particularly agricultural practices, that have made climate change so dangerous.
Well, thank you for that excellent call to action. And thank you for being with us on this special day and for your ongoing leadership and inspiration. Thank you, Secretary Clinton.
Thank you all very much.
Madam Secretary, Ambassador Verveer, we have a lot of work ahead of us that was clear based on today's conversation, but I wanted to personally thank you for your efforts in advancing women's rights and voices across the globe. Thank you for such an inspiring conversation. I'm Valentina Sade, Assistant Director at the Adrian Irish Latin America Center, where I lead our Brazil and gender equality and diversity work. As we continue today's discussion on how women's leadership can bridge divides, we now turn to Latin America and the Caribbean. Still celebrating firsts, I'm honored to introduce and welcome to the virtual Atlantic Council, Marta Lucia Ramirez, first female Vice President of Colombia. Vice President Ramirez has an extensive career in public service in Colombia, where she's been Senator, Minister of Foreign Trade, and first female Minister of Defense of Colombia, and second in Latin America. Joining us today is also Dr. Nian Gadsby Dolly, Minister of Education of Trinidad and Tobago. With over 15 years of experience in education, Minister Gadsby Dolly has also served as Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Community Development, Culture, and Arts from 2015 to 2020. Last but not least, we also welcome Maria Eugenia Brizuela de Avila, the first woman Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, serving in that position from 1999 to 2003. Minister Brizuela was elected in 2004 the first woman president of a private bank in El Salvador. Minister Brizuela is currently a non resident senior fellow at the Adrian Irish Latin America Center. Welcome, Vice President Ramirez, Minister Gadsby Dolly, and Minister Brizuela. Without further ado, I pass on the floor to my dear friend, colleague, and mentor, Maria Fernanda Bosmowski, Deputy Director for Programs at the Adrian Irish Latin America Center, to moderate this very exciting discussion. Thank you.
Valentina, thank you so much for your introduction. And wow, what an inspiring and eye-opening conversation we just heard. Thank you again, Secretary Clinton and Ambassador Verveer, for your words, for your call of action, and for just being an example for all of us women around the world. I am excited, honored, and humbled to facilitate this next conversation with regional leaders. I'm personally joining you today from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the snow has finally melted off the ground. It's a beautiful spring day, and I just feel so inspired. Before I kick off the conversation, I want to ask you who are watching, I want to ask you where you are joining from. Drop us a line in the Zoom Q&A feature or using the hashtag Mujeres at the Table, and we will let us know why you're joining. If you have questions for the panelists, feel free to drop them, share them there, and we may integrate them into our conversation. Okay, let me kick off the conversation with a broad question to our three trailblazers here that Valentina just introduced. The question I have is, participation of women in politics is key to creating more inclusive and democratic societies. We know that. The evidence shows that. What challenges, I want to ask you, have you personally overcome to become leaders in your respective countries? Let me begin with you, Vice President Ramirez. Vice President, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Maria Fernanda. As you said, it's a real pleasure for all of us to listen once again, Secretary Hillary Clinton, and of course, Ambassador Melanie Verveer, because we know that each of us, we have to learn from others' experiences and of course from others' successes and failures, because we have to recognize this is a very difficult road for all of us. And let me say that for me, it's clear that politics is not a fair play, it's a very rude play. And if you are not ready to play the same, in the same way that others, maybe you are going to have some trouble. And this is my case. I run for the presidency of Colombia twice. And the last time I decided to participate in the kind of primaries because we were in this concern with a leftist, very populist candidate, and I decided to participate in this primary without a party, without all this machinery surrounding me, with very few money, but I decided to participate because I was clear that I had a very good support from citizens, a good support from the youth. It was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And finally, we did this alliance with the current president, Ivan Duque. So sometimes you have this challenge. What is my purpose? What is my goal? My goal is to serve Colombia. And to serve Colombia means sometimes that I have to be apart. I have to take this position. But I feel proud to be in this position. This is the first time, of course, that we have a vice president in Colombia. From the vice presidency, I have been working with different ministries in the cabinet in order to support economic growth, jobs creation, and of course, course, during the pandemic, it was an important coordination labor because we need that everybody was focused in the health and sanitary measures, but also in the recovery of the economy, in trying to restart soon in the economy, because we were clear that 2, 3, 4 months in this stop, it create poverty in our country. So that's one of the main jobs that I have been doing in the vice presidency. But of course, my first goal is to work for women. This is something I have been doing for many years. When I was Minister of Foreign Trade, my cabinet members were 50% women, 50% men, and it was a very good ministry in foreign trade. And then when I became Minister of Defense, I promote women for generals, because before me, women were allowed to be colonels, and after colonels, there was nothing. They have to be apart from the military forces. Now, women can run for generals, and we have had some generals in the army and the police and in the air force and in the navy, of course. So I believe that the big challenge is to maintain clear why are you in politics? Which is your goal? Is to have the power, or is to provide a service? Is to serve your country? In my case, is to serve the country. So sometimes it doesn't matter if you are not in the first position. You have to serve, and you have to protect your democracy. You have to protect from populists. You have to protect from any kind of threats that our democracies can have in this current situation, because there is this discontent from the population, all these protesters and people fighting because the people is not having a better quality of life after all this opening of the economies. Um, we were so enthusiastic in the year 2000 with WTO and all this opening from the international economy. But the reality is that we have a big gap between poor people and rich people, and the middle class is not growing. It's not growing very rapid. So we have to be clear that this discontent is creating a kind of threat for democracy, for institutions, and of course from the economic market base, from the market economy in our countries. So
Definitely.
this is the challenge, to maintain serving, because this is the real priority, the working in politics.
Thank you, Vice President Ramirez. And you should be proud of all the fantastic work that you have been doing. It has not gone unnoticed. Minister Gatsby Dolly, how has your experience been different or similar? How is that in a small island, Trinidad and Tobago?
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's an extreme pleasure to be a part of this conversation and to be able to interact with all of these distinguished world leaders. And I really appreciate the opportunity. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have just about 1.4 million people, so that may be less than one of the cities, one of your larger cities. And in our lower house, where we have elected members, we have 27% of them being women. I am an elected member as well, so I'm a member of parliament. And in the cabinet, where I sit as well, we have 35% women. So that's our ratio. And this has been the type of ratio for the past maybe 2 terms, the past maybe 10 years or so. With Trinidad and Tobago, one of our main hindrances to women taking part in politics is the fact of the game. And Her Excellency spoke about the game and being willing to play this game of politics. It's not an easy game. It's not something for the faint of heart. And many women don't see themselves being exposed in that way to the public. Another hindrance is the fact that in Trinidad and Tobago, we are still very matriarchal in terms of our family structure. And therefore, as women, we tend to focus more on raising families and so on. And even though we have many professional women politics takes it to a different level in terms of the time that is necessary and so on. So you would find many women in their childbearing years, between the 20s and the 30s, really focusing on maybe their personal education and raising families. And what you tend to find that in politics, you have persons, men who would have been involved for many years. And so they are the ones who rise through the ranks, because at the time when women may have been rearing families, the men would have been already involved. So in terms of the options, when positions are chosen, you have so many more male options because of this. And so at this time, Trinidad and Tobago is really seeing more women coming out. We've had one woman prime minister in our years of independence from 1962, and we have currently a woman president. And these are two firsts, they have not been repeated. And so therefore, what we want to encourage and have to encourage is women being in politics, being in leadership, and being there for a while, so that they make it through the ranks and are part of the options when positions are being chosen and so on. And for that to happen, we have, as a country, to really promote the fact that you can do the both. You can raise a family as well as get involved in politics, which is not something that is usually chosen at this time. So those are some of our challenges. Of course, I'm a mother as well, so I face them every day and understand the challenge that goes along with it. And those really affect us a lot.
Thank you, Minister. As a working mother, I understand what you're talking about. Minister Brizuela, you have a lot of fans in the chat. A lot of people have joined here to listen to you. A true pioneer. You served as El Salvador's first female Minister of Foreign Affairs more than 2 decades ago. And today you have a female Minister of Foreign Affairs as well. Would love to hear some of your experience, your perspectives, what needs to change in the region.
Well, thank you for the opportunity of accompanying this incredible women in celebrating International Women's Day. Hillary, Milan, Marta Lucia, Nian. I will try to focus my response on women becoming leaders, as I have served in the public sector as well as in the private sector and in civil society. With women underrepresented in the top ranks of leadership roles, we all lose. So this sober assessment shouldn't discourage us, but motivate us to identify what are the challenges that female leaders face. So let me take my own example. I first had to gain the self-confidence that we do belong at the table. I was born into machismo. I was a girl, and back then society did not expect much of me beyond marriage. So I'm so happy when I listened to both of the people, the ministers who have gone before me, and also the vice president. Because when I graduated from high school, I was the top student in my class, but the school counselor downgraded me to second place to hand the first spot to a male classmate. And when I challenged this, my father sided with him and said, only studies on French civilization at the Sorbonne are an option for you. So after a year in Paris, I found that meaning, I found that purpose that Marta Lucia is talking about, which was serving my fellow human beings and my country. And so against my father's will, I came back to El Salvador to study law and enrolled at the National University, where I paid my way working at the courts. So when the Salvadoran Civil War began, my father and brothers were forced to leave the country with no option than to leave the family businesses in my hands. Through 12 years of civil war and a strong purpose that was guiding my efforts, I moved on, and I even became part of government institutions and boards because of that calling to take my private sector skills to public service. Finally, I was offered a position of Minister of Foreign Affairs, which I accepted enthusiastically, but you always face challenges. Even then, I face a persistent gender stereotypes. For example, just to conclude my first remarks, on my first visit to the UN, when we were only 9 women foreign ministers in the world, one of the men in the room asked me for coffee with milk. So what else could the only women in the room be there for? So I did serve his coffee, but I took my seat at the table, trusted my voice, and proved my worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayu. And hearing you speak, I'm reminded of the saying that well-behaved women rarely make history. And I think that you are an embodiment of that. Vice President Ramirez, I want to go back to you, because for the past 20 years, there has been a steady increase in the percentage of women elected to political positions across the region. Less than a decade ago, Latin America was home to a third of the world's female presidents, but that number is smaller today. I have a two-part question for you. One, does this necessarily mean that we have gone backwards in terms of bringing women to the highest public office? Two, can you talk about what are some of the unique challenges that women across Latin America and the Caribbean face in terms of gender inequality, not only the political sphere? Vice President, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Let me say, first of all, that I believe that yes, some years ago, 15 years ago, we had so many women in the first position in some countries, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica. Unfortunately, this is not in the same right now. And unfortunately, it has a relation with this split region that we have right now, because during many years, because of Chavez, Venezuela, all this trouble in our region, we have had this division. And I really believe that we have some people who are very convinced about not a left, because left is not a problem. The problem is when people with the leftist speech, they believe that they can take power and they can change institutions and they can change the economic system in order to give citizens something that nobody can produce, because you cannot provide citizens welfare and food and everything if there is no private sector, if there is no industries who are producing this. So because this very divided region, I believe that some of the women, they were more close to that regime, and then in the political change in so many countries make that it turns to right, center right, and there were not enough women in this position to take the leadership. But I believe that this is something that it's not left, it's not right. We have to provide conditions to women to participate in politics. And this is one of my real goals, how to support all women in order to have, first of all, economic empowerment. We need that women have their own income. We need that women have their own professional realization and success, in order to be more clear about themselves, in order to have more security. And also, if they want to serve, if they want to serve from the state, they have to be prepared to manage the state. You cannot go to the state, you cannot go to politics without being an expert in how to manage the state, as a senator, or as a congressman, or as a minister, as people who really can take this leadership. Because inexperience can cost a lot, not only to you, to your country. And this is something that it's clear for us. So we are working in order to promote this economic empowerment and also political empowerment, but also to provide better security for women, because unfortunately we are in a region that there is still a lot of violence against women, not only rape, but also murder. And there's so many cases of murder in women. So that's something that we have to be conscious. We want to promote and to empower economically, politically, but we have to be clear that there is insecurity and we have to protect women. And in terms of political leadership, during the vice presidency, I have been working in order to create a kind of a school, a kind of institution, because it's not an institution, it's a program more than anything, in order to have a political leadership for women from any parties, right, left, in the center, without parties. I'm just trying to make women who want to serve, who want to have a leadership in the society, that they have to understand what is the state, what are the responsibilities as a mayor, as a governor, how to participate in a campaign, how to do a good campaign without a lot of money, because it's clear for men it's more easy to have a good budget for the campaigns than for women. Unfortunately, in Latin America, and it's the case of Colombia, some cases, not always, but some cases, people pay for votes. And you have to teach women it's not valid to pay for votes. It's not good for democracy. So you have to run with your ideals, your programs, your experience, your knowledge, your wish to serve, and your strength, your inner strength. And that's why I believe that this leadership school, or this program for this leadership in politics in Colombia, this is something that it's calling many women, young women, who are calling every day. I want to participate. I'm not in politics. I don't know how to do, but I want to participate because I want to be ready for my country. And
That's
last year we graduate 1,500 women in this program. Next year, which is 22, we are going to have a election for Senate and also for the House, and we are going to have a presidential election. So I'm calling women, you have to be part of this. And we also have recently we have in the Congress a legal reform in order to ask political parties to present equal lists for this election of Congress. So they have to present 50% of women, 50% of men. And now I'm saying it's not enough to have 50% of women in those lists. You have to support women to be elected, because it's not only to have their names in a
Right.
list, they have to be elected. So you have to assure that they are going to have the financial aid, that they are going to have television advertising for women programs, because we know it's difficult, but through a leadership and through this real decision to serve to our societies, we have to reduce these gender gaps in the Colombian society. And we are doing something very similar for this economic empowerment. We are working now with women in the rural areas to have to become them real entrepreneurs, but
yeah.
not a short-term entrepreneurship, but a long-term entrepreneurship, scalable, sustainable, profitable. We need to see women who are real entrepreneurs, because now this economic gap is something which is going to be very difficult to solve only through job creation. You have to create more and more new companies, but with this clarity that they are going to be permanent entrepreneurs, and they are going to have a good income. So it's difficult, but you have to
Correct.
every day.
Thank you, Vice President. And Minister Brizuela de Avila, I want to build off of that last point. The economic toll of the pandemic on women across the region. The global economic shock caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has, we all know, disproportionately affected women and continues to threaten all the progress that women have made thus far in the economy, but also specifically the formal labor markets. Data from the ILO, the International Labor Organization, shows that 6 in 10 women in Central America are in the informal sector. My question to you is, how can leaders across the region use this moment to empower women, and what policies concretely should we be doubling down on?
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. And I do understand that we're running out of time, so I'll be very quick. I do believe that an urgent matter the government should address is the fact that COVID has only worsened the situation for women, with unemployment, also with the risk of violence against them. So the very first challenge I would like to put on the table is the gender-based violence. We do have to take a stand as it has risen globally, and we have to find and adopt measures that provide free shelter for women victims and do not let numbers like 120 feminicides in 2020 in El Salvador continue to grow. But the most important challenge is to see and create opportunities for women. Because once they have and they are economically empowered, they will not allow themselves be trampled over. So one of the important actions that I do recommend is that we have to formalize the economy. In my country, 70% of the economy is informal. 64% of the micro and small businesses are led by women. Formalization can reduce poverty, strengthen economies, and afford rights to those who need them the most. When Secretary Clinton and Ambassador Verveer led Pathways to Prosperity in the Americas, they named me Pathway Envoy. So we traveled the continent, especially empowering small businesses, mostly led by women. And that's where we have to introduce cooperation programs similar to those, as also through civil society and NGOs like Vital Voices, where we seek to empower women economically, especially through mentorships. So to advance women, we need perseverance and we need the accurate resources, but they have to be coordinated in an effective way. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for everyone who's on here listening, we do have until 5:15 Eastern time. So we do have 10 more minutes. And I want to shift back to you, Minister Gatsby Dolly, and shift gears a little bit, talk about investing in girls' education, because that is a fundamental pillar in bringing about gender equality. And last Friday, actually, the Atlantic Council hosted Malala Yousafzai, who spoke at length about this issue. We know that as a consequence of the pandemic, the regional GDP contraction in Latin America and the Caribbean has been the greatest has been greater than the world average, excuse me. How can countries, Minister, include investing in girls' education in all of the COVID-19 recovery plans and beyond?
In Trinidad and Tobago, especially in our secondary school system, we have a situation where our girls outperform our boys, and it's by a significant margin. It happens there in our secondary system, and we find a lot more girls going into the universities and outperforming our boys. So we have that situation. However, when we shift gears to politics and business, we have girls being or women being underrepresented. So what we are looking at really is a situation where girls are performing very well, but they are being channeled into certain areas that don't give them, one, a strong political voice, or two, real power in terms of economic power and independence. And so in terms of girls' education and post-COVID, understanding that women are more at risk, understanding, and that's our situation as well, where daycares are closed, even at this time, and therefore we have women who are, feeling the brunt of that because they have to, juggle between taking care of their children and going to work. And we also have quite a number of our student body at home. And again, the women are the ones bearing the brunt of taking care of the education of their children now at home. So it's really been very difficult on women. And so what we need at this point in terms of investing in education is really looking at where we channel our young ladies and how we fit them into the corporate structure, what they're aiming for, because we don't want our women to be performing so well at the secondary level, at the university level, and then being underrepresented in the places that count. And so in terms of that, that is what we need to do to guide women into the areas of politics. And I liked what Her Excellency Ramirez spoke about in terms of that, that school and giving women that level of education, regardless of parties, not partisan, but just allowing women to consider politics and having a seat at the table and preparing them for that journey, because it is a difficult thing. And these are the kinds of things that we in Trinidad and Tobago would have to do, and specifically for our women, to ensure that they are represented in the places where their voices will matter, where policies are made, and where economic power allows us to wield a measure of influence on the policies that are made in the country.
Thank you, Minister Gatsby, Dolly. My last question for all three of you. We have talked about the challenges that women currently face across the region, but it is not all grim. There have been victories in the last decade. Certainly, you have shown that, and you are an embodiment of that. I go back to that idea of being an embodiment of the progress that has been done in the region. What are some steps that countries across the region can adopt to foster opportunities for leadership, such as this political leadership school that Vice President Ramirez has undertaken in Colombia? What are some other examples of that? Um, Again, to foster opportunities for leadership across the political sphere, but also economic and social spheres that will guarantee the empowerment of women and girls. And lastly, also would like to ask, from you, what can institutions like the Atlantic Council do to help accelerate this pending task of gender equality in the Americas, but also around the world? Minister Gatsby Dolly, I'll go back to you.
I think we've had some positive examples of, and as I said, we are embodiments of that. But I think we really have to introduce into the national conversation the need for women. I think establishing that, I don't think that is very clear, certainly around the world, that women need to be involved, that women must be involved, must have a seat at the table, even though this has been in conversation for a long time. And driving civil society, driving government to understand that need and therefore to select for it in terms of the policies you make that specifically target women in these areas. Because for too long, we look at the successes that women have made and we say, well, you know, a lot of women are now, you know, in education, a lot of women are, you know, corporate and so on. However, many times the levels that they are at the really successful ones are the exceptions and not the rule. So it means then that we have to introduce that into the national conversation, understand it as a need. And the only way that we can do that is if we drive with one voice, civil society and government drive with one voice the need for women, and therefore we form policies that will allow for that to take place.
Thank you, Minister Gatsby Dolly. Minister Brizuela.
Thank you so very much, Maria Fernanda. Women are the largest untapped reservoir of talent in the world, and they are key to create more inclusive, responsive, and democratic societies. So we have to guarantee equal opportunity for girls and women in all fields. Just allowing them to enter any field where their passion takes them, be it in the professional field, in civil society, as housewives, exercising their leadership in their office and communities and family life. Women have to be brought back, though, also into the workforce. As women, that I have been championing flexibility at the workplace to retain more women and to encourage them to participate more actively in corporate responsibilities. And thank God we had, in that sense, a small silver lining in the pandemic, because being, flexibility-based productivity has been accelerated because of of COVID. So there is now a huge opportunity for more women to work remotely, providing them with an important source of income and economic empowerment, due to the fact that women take on more responsibilities at home, such as child and elderly care. Having access to a flexible time schedule will support them. So we need to institutionalize that. Another aspect where I see an opportunity is in the regional growth in Central America. It has also been very important during the pandemic, our trading, with the neighboring countries. So I see an opportunity for deepening intra-regional trade. And SMEs, many of them led by women, is there where they start their export experience. So nearshoring, which is an opportunity for the region, as international companies reevaluate their manufacturing concentration in Asia, especially China, we can give women, another opportunity, because women in our region make up most of the labor force in the maquilas. The Atlantic Council's contribution of hosting this type of event has been fundamental. And may just close by saying and speaking to women directly, as it is not only what others can do for us, but I encourage you to make sense of your life to find your own meaning, to manage your energy, and to adopt a more constructive way of looking at the world with positive valorization so we are able to connect and definitely get involved.
Thank you so much, Minister Brizuela de Avila. Vice President Ramirez, what are your final thoughts before we close and pass it on to the director of our center, Jason Marsek?
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. My final thoughts. First of all, I believe that a gender equality is not a one person task, it must be a society task. And that's why, in our case, I asked President Ivan Duque to include this gender equality as one of the chapters in our National Development Plan. It includes a lot of provisions to ensure this women's equity in Colombia. But after 2 years, I also asked all the mayors and governors in Colombia to do the same at the regional level. So it's in the national, it's now also in the regional level. And I'm asking women in every single municipality and governor and governor department in Colombia to ask for their plans, to ask for the specific programs that these governors and mayors have right now. Second, I believe that we need in our region to create a kind of a trust or something like this. In Colombia, we create something which is a trust. It's included in the entrepreneurship law that we recently have in our Congress. And this trust is to provide financing and also to invest in companies owned by women. And I'm asking, and I'm working, and we are working with President, of course, we are working with the Colombian government procurement to give a preference to those companies which are owned by women to buy from them part of this government procurement every year. And finally, I believe that in our region, we have to ask to the multilateral banks to work with governments in order to have some specific clause in the international loans to provide some specific part of these international loans for women entrepreneurship in all the in each country. Of course, it's not money for nothing. It's money with a lot of conditions. They have to have a good a business plan. They have to have a good team. They have to have a good product, goods or services, whatever. But we need to have this requirement to governments. If you don't have one specific budget for companies owned by women, we are going to have exactly the same poverty in women in Latin America, and we are going to continue with this unacceptable gap that we have. We have a lot of
Unacceptable is the word.
poverty in rural areas and poverty also in urban areas. So I
Thank you
think
so
these
much.
are three
Thank you so
thoughts.
much, Vice President Ramirez. Again, Minister Gatsby Dolly and Minister Brizuela de Avila, thank you so much. To close this event, I want to pass on the floor to somebody who is a champion for women, cross day in and day out at the center. Jason, it is such an honor to work with you, and really you are the right person to close this event. Bring us home. Jason Marsek, Director of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center.
Well, thank you so much, Maria Fernanda. And wow, what an inspiring conversation. Vice President Ramirez, Minister Dr. Gatsby Dolly, Minister Brizuela, Maria Fernanda, what an incredible conversation and what incredible points as we move forward. And thank you to Secretary Clinton, Ambassador Revere, and of course, Adrian Arsht and our very own Ambassador Capricia Marshall as well for joining us today. Clearly, from today's conversation, the path toward gender equity is still a steep one. And unfortunately, as Secretary Clinton said, the challenges are further magnified by COVID-19, which is why it is so imperative that not only today on International Women's Day, but every day, gender equity becomes front and center in public policy matters. And men should be, frankly, men must be champions of these efforts as well. Men have a fundamental role as champions who recognize, like I do in our center and Fred Kemp and the Atlantic Council do for the broader organization, that we are better We are more impactful, we are more creative, and we are more thoughtful when women are equally at the table and equal active decision makers. I am very proud to have gender equality and diversity as one of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center's core guiding values and principles. It's reflected in what we do, how we do it, and the people with whom we engage. Today's conversation with such inspiring leaders was just the beginning of our month-long campaign, Mujeres at the Table, raising awareness on women's rights and women's leadership in the Americas through events like this, through blog posts, through Experts of the Americas video series, and others. Please continue to follow this conversation on our social media accounts, and please continue to work with us so that Mujeres can be at the table. Thank you for joining us today.